Hello, I'm ED-SKaR, and apologies for being late. I got distracted, which is a thing that keeps happening. And another thing that keeps happening is I keep having Gaunt's ghost models. And that's interesting. The camera seems to have reset in my absence. And that is going to be very easy to solve. Let's make sure the cable's in the right place. How is that? That is now the correct way up, at least. So, I have a whole bunch of Imperial Guard models here. Mostly for my Gaunt's Ghosts army, as you might expect. I've been painting them for the last year or so. And particularly, I think a lot of the ones that I've got today are Vic Designs conversions of either Catachan or Cadian models. So here is a Catachan arms and Cadian legs and head, for sake of example, with the torso piece replaced with the Vic Designs. I have already greened is Anvil Industries cloak, otherwise a Cadian upper half. This one's interesting. I've been meaning to get round to this. This is a well, at the moment it's just a Cadian model, but this will be a Volpone, wounded Volpone, probably representing Kulkis from the Ghostmaker short with Dorden looking after some wounded soldiers. In absence of anyone in the chat so far, I think I'll start off with this one, as I may as well. So let's get this on the painting handle and redo the camera all again. I'm going to be sitting in roughly this position, so the camera will need to be all the way up here. And focus there. And there is someone in chat, and the person in chat is a bot. Well, not for much longer. As there's headway made on the cloak already, let's start off today with the cloak. I actually have some green on my wet palette from previous painting models. Let's see. That's still going. It's kind of the darker green, so I'll paint this into recesses to make sure that's nice and strong. Probably get some around the neck as well. So around the neck here, this has been completed with some Milliput. You can just about see the join there. Everything back of this point is the resin from Anvil, and everything in front of that point is Milliput that I've used to sculpt in kind of the front of the cloak. And get some dark green on the last gun casing as well. Given how pale this original green was, it's almost certainly a pot of paint that I've been having trouble with for some time. And it all started with a broken airbrush. I want to see how much of this lighter green I've got on the wet palette. There's probably enough of this model, although only if the paint actually comes off of the brush. Let's mix it in a little better. It's been sitting on the wet palette for a couple of days. The green highlights on the cloak are pretty forgiving, because when I come to do the camo pattern over the top, a lot of this simply won't be visible, and so just having the hint of something, the hint of highlights, is kind of enough to sell the effect, really. This green is not necessarily playing along. Maybe I should have refreshed it, but it's just about working. Now, obviously I will need some black for the uniform, so let's break out my ever so slightly green black. And this is going to be most of the model, I think, in this colour. Ah. This is an odd reversal. Where is that other model? This one has Catachan arms and Cadian everything else. Whereas this one has a Catachan torso underneath there. You can just about see the jacket of it. But then Cadian arms. That's odd. I don't remember doing that. Well... unless someone's broken into my model collection and built some models while I wasn't looking, which I find unlikely. I built this. I just don't remember. Now it was in my not for videos pile, so it isn't particularly, or there's nothing about this model that I want to make a video on specifically, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's nothing interesting about it. So sometimes something truly uninteresting can be interesting in its own right. Is the first line for my new science fiction film noir story. I can definitely tell that I haven't smoothed this one out. I've been trying recently with gloss varnish, of all things, putting gloss varnish over the top of gloss varnish over the top of the 3D print, and then priming over the top of the gloss varnish. And what that does, because the gloss varnish has some volume, it goes some way to filling in the printing areas. Like, you don't really get layer lines with resin prints, but I'm still getting significant grid lines. The problem with any kind of smoothing technique, including the gloss varnish technique, is that the varnish doesn't know the difference between the texture that comes from imperfections in a 3D print and intentional texture of the print. So if you have some fabric texture in the original STL and you use some smoothing technique, and this doesn't matter what smoothing technique, any of them, sure, you'll reduce the amount of imperfections of the print, the grid lines and the kind of that sort of thing, but you're also going to remove some of that that texture that's part of the model. There's a lot of polystyrene cement around the around the wrist of this one. So if I just paint the kind of slightly lumpy polystyrene cement black, the colour of the uniform, it shouldn't actually be visible at all. Ugh. My poor brush is getting beaten up. And this is another reason why I often paint sub-assemblies, but I can't be bothered for a model like this. This doesn't matter. This one's just a quick, not necessarily speed paint, but I've got the recipe for my Gaunt ghosts down. I know how I paint them, so I'm just getting it done. Can I get into there? I assume the answer is no. The answer is no. Still got some white on the wet palette, so that's my grey highlight sorted. There's actually some, yeah, you can see it fairly clearly on the camera there, that kind of line there, that is what looks like a layer skip. However, it's pointing the right direction, that it is now simply a fold in the clothes. Am I getting any feedback through the, because I've got my own music in my headphones, and my microphone is kind of spiking in time with that. It's either that or it's background fuzz, which probably unpleasant to hear. Generally speaking, I don't mind being quite harsh with the highlights on the uniform and on the armor. Well, no armor on this model, but the on anything that's black being highlighted up into grey, I can be quite harsh about how bright I go, but also how strong the how strong the gradients are. Yeah, I thought of a better way of saying that. Because the next step on here, after that, is a black wash. drifting out of frame. Do I need a bit more? I think I do. That'll do nicely. And put that brush away. This poor brush. What is this? This is the Winsor & Newton Series 7 size 2. It is beaten to heckenback. This poor thing is so old. That is fingernail for comparison. That is a tiny brush. Given that my standard brush that I use for pretty much everything is that big, I paint eyes with this brush, and yet my poor Series 7 has been beaten into oblivion. But it's still just about useful for washes and stuff like that, when it doesn't need to hold a lot of volume and doesn't need to hold it in the right place per se. But back to the proper brush. So we want to get on some, we need browns for the belts and boots. We'll need some skin metallics. I just realised I didn't paint the so while I didn't paint the helmet, this helmet actually has a cloth wrap over the top. So it might be interesting if I grab some green paint to actually paint this helmet. Is it helmet wrap? Is that the right name? But to paint it up as if it's a green canvas. Haha, yes, I meant to do that all along. Definitely not a mistake. Excuse me a moment while I just move my microphone. There we go. That should be a little better. Right. Actually, it might even be interesting to paint this in a slightly different green to the cloak. Just because, hey, this is a non-standard bit of kit. This has come from who knows where. I think this this head is from the new Cadian set with all the extra heads. So if that's correct, I have exactly one of this head, and I will never have any more because I'm drowning in Cadians. I've got so many of them, don't need any more. Yeah, so it doesn't matter if this is visually distinct, and actually that calls attention to it and makes it all the more interesting. But still needs some highlighting, so let's go for little wet blend on top. And some of the edges. I'm drifting out of frame again. Not much paint left. Alright. Glaze it. Glaze the last bits on. It's fine. That's all it needs. This might end up being one of my scouts. Thinking about it. Might not. Who knows? I have a bit of a plan. With lasgun patterns and stuff about the specific pattern of lasgun that the ghosts use. Do I have a lump at the end of my paintbrush? That's quite annoying. Where was I? Ah. Lasguns. So the two patterns of lasgun that you can get easily are the Galaxy class, or Galaxy pattern, sorry, that comes with the Catachans, and the Cantrail pattern that comes with the Cadians, this being a Cadian and therefore a Cantrail. The Gaunt's Ghosts models that were released last year come with a different type of lasgun, but as they're character models and all expensive and that kind of thing, not particularly helpful that they come with something that's not available for the rest of the army. However, I noticed, as someone who spends far too much time looking at things and comparing, that the casing, or kind of receiver if you will, of the Tanith lasgun is the same length, not quite the same design, but it's about the same length as the Cantrail, and the exposed barrel section is the same length, nearly the same. There's a slight difference in the second tube as the Galaxy pattern. So if you cut off the exposed barrel section from a Galaxy and a Cantrail and swap them over, you end up with one extremely short, adorably short little carbine lasgun and a very long lasgun that looks remarkably similar to the Tanith pattern. Like I said, it's not a perfect comparison. There are some differences. But for doing a squad of them relatively quickly with easily, readily available parts, it's pretty cool. Pretty cool that that's possible and so easy. The next step is to work out the differences in the casing, the visual differences in the casing. There is, of course, the wooden kind of furniture. So on the Cantrail, so on the Tanith pattern, this kind of front section of the receiver or casing is a big lump of wood, and it's about here. It's got this zigzag, and then the back half would be green or however you prefer to paint it. I think it should be fairly easy to just score in that panel, that line, and then just paint the front end as wood. Literally just scratch a pin in that zigzag, tick tick tick, down, across, down, and that's kind of done. It might be that simple. Then there's the sighting tube, or whatever it is on the cantrail, that's also visually distinct from the Tanith version, but that's less of an easy fix. Until I find out how to do that. Select a block of milliput over the top, cut it into place, but now you're getting into a bit more effort for changing that pattern of last gun over. A little bit of effort's fine for a squad, but for doing an army, if you're doing 10 models versus 200, there's there would be a desire to keep it a little simpler than that. Just refreshing some brown onto that part because I've got all these belts to do. And I will need some water in there because that's nearly as thick as me. Actually, I do remember building this model because kind of the hip here, this area, has an extremely rough texture. And there's a very good reason why this model has an extremely rough texture in that particular part of it. That's because the legs of this model are a 3D print from Devic Designs. However, my 3D printer, being an archaic piece of kit, is not particularly good, and the print actually failed, and it had this kind of chunk missing out of it from the belt line, kind of, and this hip was just missing in a chunk. Not want to be put off by such things. I looked at some different options for filling the gap. Milliput was the first choice, and this model sat on my I would like to do some milliput to these models pile, because there's no point making up the milliput to do such a tiny job as this. You may as well make up a larger batch and get a few models done at once. But it sat there for a while, and there was no other models in that little group of, hey, we would like some milliput please. And so I took it out of the pile, and instead of using milliput, I superglued a torso to the top of it, poured superglue into that gap, or just the coating on the inner surface of the gap, and then poured baking powder over it. I often use baking powder as an aid to making superglue stick, because superglue is pretty rubbish and doesn't work by itself. But with baking powder, it's got vast quantity of, or vast amounts of surface area to grab onto. It at least has a go. It's still not the strongest join, but it's better than nothing. And polycement doesn't stick to resin anyway, so needs to be a different option. But super glue and baking powder form a lump with some amount of volume. And that volume can be difficult to work with, or it can actually be the one thing you really, really need. And in the case of this model, it was the latter. It almost certainly took a few layers. I don't remember doing it, but it almost certainly took a few layers because it tends to. But that's fine. You just go kind of drops the super glue on top of the first lot, and then some more baking powder, and if you need another lot, more super glue, more baking powder, until it's how you want it. The danger is if you dip the nozzle of your super glue bottle or tube into the baking powder, you're going to have a bad time. So be careful of that. I've somehow managed to run out of brown almost immediately after having put some on the wet parts. Let's grab another round. Let's grab a bigger batch this time, because we've got boots to do. And a bayonet. Don't generally like to paint boots brown on my Gaunt Ghost models, because I paint the base brown, the same brown in fact. And I like to have some colour separation. I kind of make up for it by like I highlight the base up to a lighter brown, and I shadow. Well, I just brown wash the boots. There's no real effort goes into the boots. Who cares about boots? Not me. But there's no easy separation point on the Dvic Design's legs. There's a few other leg pieces that don't have a separation point either, so it's not just this specific one. But I like to have legs with patties, legs with, or like patties around the top of the boots, I mean, or greaves. What is it the Acadians have? They have that like clamp around the top of the boot. Is it a greave? Is it a greave? Or is it something else? Hello, Grandpa Werewolf. Tardy but present. Me or you? I was 15 minutes late to the stream. It's my stream. Full moon, wolf moon. The wolf does the laundry to the full moon is my new indie punk album. I have generally promised not to do basing on live stream because it is kind of dull. So I'll just finish off this coat and then we'll go off to do other stuff. I'm nearly done. It's fine. It's fine. Oh, this brush just tore. I did mention earlier in the stream that this particular brush that I use for washes and messy things like throwing stuff over the basing texture. This brush has seen better days. Let's see how bad the damage is. It's weird how it still comes to a point, even though there's so little of it left. This is half the length it used to be, less than half the length, I think. I remember it being a fairly small brush, because I was disappointed in how small it was. But just to put it into context, the brush that I currently use for just about everything is... Just compare the volume of those two brushes for a second. This is my good brush at the moment, and this was my good brush, and it's now relegated to basing and washes. Scrub toilets, high fantasy lifestyle. By comparison, basing is an excellent thing. Well, it's certainly less smelly. Well, I've kind of... In the 45 minutes that I've been rambling on, I've kind of got a long way into this model. Saying that, I haven't finished all the base coats on it, but I have done some highlighting here and there, and I've done most of the base coats. I should probably be sensible and finish off the base coats before I wander off and do some other things. So, I noticed that the rifle stock has no paint. There's also a gap on that pouch, so I'll clean that up. And paint this rifle stock. As long as there's no more unintentional grey, there's a few gaps. That's not really something I'd missed. Yeah, so I think it's just the metal now, and then I can just finish up the highlights and call it done. Let's get a spot of this. How are you going to behave today? See, this particular metallic paint is a bit of an enigma, a bit of a dilemma sometimes. A bit more difficult than it really needs to be. Because, isn't that such a beautiful colour for a dark steel? I really, really like the colour. However, the metallic flakes are kind of somewhat, they behave in a weird way, and I'm not really sure how to describe it. But it ends up sometimes looking like glitter rather than steel. So we shall see when this dries how well it's gone. I'm usually able to just throw on, I've got a brighter silver that's a little more consistent, and I'm able to kind of mix that in to make where is it? Here we go. It's just to tidy it up a bit. But saying that, it's not too bad this time. I don't think you can see any of it on the camera. I can just about see some with the naked eye. So, lighter silver just to make it more consistent, but also I may as well give it some highlights. Yeah, that does it. I'll have to clean up the edges of that with some of the green. Not sure what it is about that metallic that's causing that kind of difficulty. It might just be that it's bad batch paint. Or I might not have shaken it enough. I mean, I've shaken the heck out of that bottle, so I highly doubt that it's that. Just right there. A little bit of green over the top. I can almost still see the sparkles through the green. Yep. That's good. I don't see any unpainted grey anywhere. So, base coat's done. Finish off the highlights. Let's do the skin next. Yeah, skin, highlights, and the some final details at the end. The music is obnoxiously relaxing. Another one. So, although most of my Gaunt's Ghost models get, like most of the areas of the painting get just a mix of two colours that I mix together. Is that a mould line or is that something on his hand? I may have scratched it with a knife while I was building it. Yeah, while most of the model gets kind of two coats, like a darker colour and kind of one deliberate highlight, either wet blended or with the uniform just a really harsh highlight that's then washed with black. With the skin, because the Caucasian paints I have are quite finicky and very chalky as well. They need a bit more bots coming in for the mellow vibe of soothing tunes. It nearly put me to sleep. That was a very nice one. And then another relaxing one straight away. Yeah, so the skin gets a lot of attention. Skin probably gets as much attention as the cloak. And I'm probably fine with that, to be honest. That ratio of where you put your attention on a model. White. I need white. Don't shoot until you can see the whites of his eyes. Alternatively, don't shoot until you've painted the whites of his eyes. One or the other. I always find painting eyes to be very difficult underneath this helmet, but let's have a close look. He seems pretty upset with something he's seen off to the side of camera there. That's fine. It's not great, but as I say, mostly covered by the helmet, so not much of an issue. I do need to do some highlighting up on the brown still. I need rose gold as well. That lovely rose gold I use for the Aquillas. I'm thinking the skull on the helmet gets like a bone colour, so brown into white. Let's give that a go. Do I have any of this brown left? Not really. Okay, we're going for the darker brown then. There's plenty of that. And then glazing. Oh, that didn't really go as a glaze, but that works. With some white, and then let's see if I can achieve a glaze this time. Not really, but it went on neatly. It went out of focus is what it did. Where's your focus? Is that focus? I mean, it's probably as good as it gets. And let's get some little scratchy, leathery looking highlights. Hey, Dan Hennig. Good music. Oh boy. The belt is mostly made out of baking powder, so trying to highlight that is an exercise in futility, particularly as it's hidden underneath the arms, given how you're normally going to be looking at it on the gaming table. I don't think any more effort than that is required. Just some general little scratchy highlights around the edges of anything that's supposed to be leather, so belts, pouches, and the knee pads of anyone who has knee pads. Kind of mostly there. Wandering Celt. Hello, how are you doing? I should probably get the controls. There's something about this last gun it's not looking right. I think it's just that because of the original green that I base coated this in is so like the pigment. There's something about the pigment's gone funny with it. That it's just not looking right. So let's pick out all of the controls and see if that helps. If my brush can stay sharp, that is. currently at work, just popped in to say hello. Well, thank you, Wandering Celt, for popping by. I will leave this one up public because it doesn't seem to make a difference whether I make them private and then public after a week, or whether I just leave them public from when they're streamed. So I'm just going to go back to leaving it public. Null Noil calling. Nah, none of that Null Noil. I've got some homemade ink wash here. It's way better than Null Noil. But I want to go about this a little more tactfully than throwing a wash over it. There's other ways to achieve a deeper, richer look. It's not necessarily that I want it darker. What do I want? There's the question. What do I want from it? What's wrong about it? The pigments are... I mean, it sort of is just desaturated, so maybe I need to throw in just some more of the good dark green into the middle, which makes the desaturated stuff on the edge look like an edge highlight, kind of just done in reverse. I mean, it does look better wet. So maybe that is the case. I just need a few more layers of the good green to actually bring out some of this colour. It is very similar to the camo cloak, and there's good reason for that. It's because it's the same greens. The camo cloak being desaturated is really not a problem though, because, well, for two reasons. One, I don't mind variations in my cloaks. They can look wildly different from one another, but also it's going to be covered in my camo pan, so the cloak will end up looking way different. It's just this last gun that's just bugging me, and it's looking better now that it's got that darker green. Wandering Celt says, we are so used to contrast we forget most soldiers are camouflaged. That is absolutely true. The whole point is to break up the silhouette, to wear types of hat and clothing and other things that don't immediately have a silhouette of a soldier, but also not just shape, colour as well, so that you can blend into the background. Whereas with mini painting, we're doing the opposite. We're trying to accentuate every single aspect of the model to make it more visible from further away. That is an interesting kind of opposite of kind of we're painting the thing in an opposite way to how that thing would exist in reality. Right, I've just realised I've forgotten to do the metal on the... Wait, I've got it here. On my daggers, which I do with the rose gold because it's fancy. And that's directly against the law, the grand almighty law that you can't possibly go against. I don't know if it's ever stated about the handle and crossguard of the silver, but certainly they wouldn't leave it shiny metal. They'd dull it down with some boot black, boot polish. But again, we are painting things to make them look more visible. So, bright shiny gold, bright shiny rose gold on the on the bayonet there. Yeah, that's kind of done. I mean, I've spent more on this. I've spent more time on this 5-point model than I really should have. So, is it already half past 8? I've spent more than an hour on this one model. Currently rereading it. They do dull it down. Yeah, they dull down cap badges and metalwork on the rifles as well. So it makes sense that they would dull down anything that's metal. But I was wondering if it says anything. Is the crossguard stated as being? Is it also silver? Is it made of wood? So on and so forth. Because I, off the top of my head, don't remember any of any reference to that. I remember that, yeah. McCall taking... Was that in... What book is that in? Because I was about to say that sounds like it's from Ghostmaker, but I've currently got my head in Ghostmaker at the moment because I'm doing a lore video about it, which is taking its time because I don't have the artwork to fill it. I'm not really a 2D artist, so I'm just taking loads of photographs from the description of Lark's last rifle, Nullwood. First omnibus. I don't have any of the omnibus. I've got the original. I've got the singular releases. My Gaunt's Ghosts bookshelf is an eclectic mix of all of the first. Well, I think they're all not first edition, but first design. So First and Only has the red radar haze. And then the next few books have the green radar haze. Then it goes to the the plain black spine with just the artwork on the front, and then it goes to the hardbacks with a gold stripe, and then hardbacks with a red stripe. Then it goes to the different hardbacks for Anarch, Warmaster and Anarch, because they've got a different binding. Sorry, I can't hear you over the sound of how much of a nerd I am. No one cares about the binding of the book. As long as it doesn't fall apart while I'm reading it, it's fine. Grandpa Werewolf, you said it yourself. Tiddlywinks with delusions of grandeur. 5-point model is lucky to get a base coat. Skull white, flesh wash, used to be my bone flesh everything. Yeah, that is absolutely legitimate. I'm perfectly happy to play against someone with unpainted models. That's hardly a concern. But yeah, if you really must paint it and you don't really care about how much effort you put in, just paint it as simple as you can. I mean, you know how you want your characters to look, but does everything need to look that good? Right. See how much of this light brown I've got left. Yeah, tiddlywinks with delusions of grandeur is going to be my catchphrase from now on. Just when I first thought of it, I just absolutely burst out laughing. It's such an absurd comparison to make, and yet it is so accurate. These are gaming pieces. That the model has no impact on the game beyond, like, this is an Imperial Guard. This is an Imperial Guard with a flamethrower. This is an officer. That's it. That's all the information you need from it. Painting is therapeutic, says Wandering Celt, which is absolutely true. If you enjoy painting and you want to paint every single 5-point model to the best of your ability, and you enjoy doing so, then it is worth it just for that factor. You don't have to do speed paints. You don't have to rush through everything. You can absolutely take your time and enjoy every brushstroke. That's another reason why I kind of like playing against unpainted armies, and why that kind of 3-color rule needs to go away. Because you've got people who enjoy painting, they want to spend a lot of time on each model. Well, if you spend a lot of time on each model, it takes a long time to get an army done. So, like, you play against someone and they've got 3 of their models painted, and then the next week they've got 5 of their models painted. Don't really care. It doesn't matter. They're enjoying painting. Wandering Celt says 5-point model should just be dipped in mud. Yes. Brilliant. So here's the thing. Having seen people completely doused in mud to the point where you cannot see any differentiation between, like, their clothes, their arms, it's all just a solid color. How do you paint that in scale? Because as soon as you put something like that in scale and you douse it in a basing texture, it doesn't look like a model anymore. So what do you have to do to that to make it look like a model, to make it look in scale like a person that's covered in mud? That's a really interesting question that you didn't ask, but I now have. Huh. There we go. I think we're done. I've got just enough colour in that last gun for it to be... I know everything looks a little desaturated on the camera, but that's because of the software I'm using. I don't get to change the brightness values or shutter speed or anything like that. So it is as it is. It's not great. It's fine. It's a 5-point model. It's done. I do need to do the base rim. So I'll finish up on this model and then we'll call the stream done. I will allow you all to ask any questions in the chat and I will answer them before we wrap up. That's too thin. I think everything on this wet palette is too thin now. Spray of mist as drying. Spray of mist as drying. I don't know what that means. There we go, that's better. There we go. A nice sensible brown base rim. Just do a bit of dry brushing. Oh, that was a disaster. I just cleaned off the brush, put the cap on, and then tapped it to make sure the cap was secure. And the tap fell off, and so I just stabbed my brush right into the table. Right, it's fine. Let's try that again. No. There you go. Tap. Good. That was an unnecessary disaster. Wandering Celt asks, have I seen the Archon Kickstarter Ramparts? Real interest is the female snipers cadre going to pick up as a Vergas group. I have not seen that. The only Kickstarter I've seen recently related to the Ghosts is the Soldiers Against Humanity, which actually I have right here. So this is the sample model for Soldiers of Humanity, and again, 5-point model. Didn't spend an awful lot of time painting it, but this is a fully 3D printed model, which I don't like as much because 0% official parts is pushing it a little bit. I'm quite happy to have an official model that I've swapped out the torso for example this Divic Designs torso with cloak, but having a fully 3D printed model is a little too much. Not that I want to give Games Workshop any more money, they do not deserve it. So most of my Ghosts recently have been off of just parts off of eBay. And I make sure there's at least, I'm kind of loosely going for 70%. I'm not strict about it. I will say one thing about the Soldiers of Humanity: their body proportions are a little weird. I've got a video coming out. It should be this week's video. But the knees of the models are way below where the knees should be on the model. And as soon as I've got this off my brush, I will see if I can show it on camera here. Even though this is the worst camera view, probably won't be able to see it, but we'll give it a go. So let's line them up, and we can see that actually if I put them this way around, then they're leaning together. There we go. We can see that the top of the head is about the same height, the eyes are about the same height, the shoulders are about the same height, the belt is about the same height, but then if you look at the knees, the kind of, these are Divic Designs legs, these knees are up here, whereas Soldier Against Humanity, these knees are good like 3 or 4 millimeters lower, which proportionally is almost crazy. They kind of just sticking up out the top of the boots, and it's a minor thing, like that shouldn't be a problem, but every time I look at this model I just see the knees coming out of where the shin should be, and it's a real shame because the cloaks are cool and they're coming out with multi-part kits. I haven't seen the multi-part option, so I don't know if it's compatible with, like, say, Cadian or Catgen parts. But yeah, you see it now, don't you? Don't you? The knees, and it's all of them. I suspect what they've done is they've built an original like skeleton to do all of the posing, and then there was the knees were in the wrong place on that original, so every single one has the same mistake coming out of it. Knee-deep mud base. You know what? That's actually genuinely a good idea. And if I reach all the way to the other side of the universe to get this model, here's another thing that I was working on recently. I made a silicon mold for 25mm disc, and I've just come up with inventive ways of using them. So this is a disc base rather than the hollow base that we're used to. This is just a flat disc. Oh, actually it says WizKids on it, so it's from one of the WizKids packs. But you make the model on there, paint it all up, and then put that into the mold and pour just a tiny bit of resin over the top, and you get this kind of swampy, muddy look. This is the second one of these I've done. I was doing these for a video, and then I kind of didn't like the first one, so I've made the second one, and I sort of don't like this one any better. I can't work out why I don't like it. It's fine. It's exactly what I wanted, and yet I'm just, for some reason, I don't like it. Anyway, I think it is cool. And yeah, if you were to saw this one off at the knees, you could easily have that kind of sunk in. I mean, maybe just below the knees, and you have the knees kind of poking out. That would be a pretty cool basing option. I wouldn't want to do this for the whole army though, because doing this takes time, and every resin pour, like the silicon mold doesn't last forever, and so every resin pour you're getting closer to the end of the life of the silicon. So the amount of failures you'd get over the course of an army, you could do a whole squad easily. You'd probably do 20 or 30 from one mold. So if you did 10, you could do a whole army, like 2,000 point army infantry. Yeah, maybe it isn't so bad, because if you're doing 10 at a time, doing a resin pour for one base is annoying, because you have to measure out like the tiniest amount of each of the A part and the B part of the resin. But if you have a larger batch that you're doing 10 molds at a time, and if you're doing other things as well, that makes it easier. Napoleonic long grass. That's also a good idea. You could put foliage and trees and all sorts of other stuff around the knees to improve upon that. But I think we are kind of, I'm rambling at this point. I'm just gonna close up my brand new wet palette, because I broke the last one, and so we went out and got some chocolates so I could have a new one. But we have painted a single model, and that's fine, even though it was a bit mucky, a bit messy. It was always going to be, because of the super glue repair in here. But it looks fine. It's a 5-point model, and it's now painted better than it deserves to be. So thank you to everyone who's popped by. Who else has popped by? We have Grandpa Werewolf, some bots, and Wandering Celt, who have joined me today, and thank you to anyone else who's watching quietly in the background. For the terms of news, stuff that I'm getting up to. The Back to the Brush podcast, like the interim episode, is now live. So if you head over to Back to the Brush, you can see that episode of the podcast. And we're hopefully back on track for doing that monthly again from now. I will have a video at the end of the week on the Soldiers of the Wasteland model. Sorry, Soldiers of Humanity model. But otherwise, until I stream next week... You caught me just in time there, Grandpa Werewolf. I will enlighten you. This is my wet palette. And this is the most famous wet palette of all. And you can see here that there was a sticker that says the label of the chocolate company who makes this particular wet palette. I mean, for them it's packaging for their chocolates, but for us it is the perfect wet palette. Because it has a lid that seals. If I grab a brush and I start going into it, I can come in and touch the paper at any point because the edge here is very low. And it's nice and big and flat, so it holds a lot of water. And if you really don't recognize it even now, this is a Ferrero Rocher 21 pack, I think. Or a 19 pack, or something like that. It's the mid-size box. And it makes for a perfect wet palette. So, anyway. I'm ED-SKaR, I always will be. Thank you very much for joining me in this stream. And until next week when I stream again, probably painting another cowboy, goodbye, and have a good time. And end stream.